Inanna, but it's probably mostly relevant to all pagans and maybe practitioners of other types of religions too. These are just some thoughts based on my experiences that I thought might be helpful for others on a similar path. So if you're part of the pagan or magical community, you're probably aware that there can be a certain amount of animosity between different types of practitioners. It's understandable that a lot of people just need validation that whatever path they are on is the best or correct one. A lot of people just naturally have a black and white type of thought process where there can only be one correct answer to any question. So it can feel like an attack on your practice or even on your identity to see other people doing things that are completely different from you. We see it with Reconstructionist pagans versus Neopagans, hard polytheists versus soft polytheists, witches versus ceremonial magicians, pagans versus New Agers. Okay, so maybe that last one might be valid. Reconstructionist perspectives and Neopagan perspectives can both hold value. To really understand a very ancient deity like Inanna, we do need to learn about how she was worshipped in her original cultures, or we will lose out on a lot of important context. A lot has changed in the last 5,000 or more years. Inanna is a very complex and very ancient goddess. She was worshipped for thousands of years. She went from an agricultural goddess to a steward of large-scale civilization. She was mostly forgotten for a long time, but now she is making her presence known in the world again. As cultures and civilizations change, she reveals different aspects of herself to guide us. So we can't rely on following a strictly Reconstructionist approach either without our spiritual development stagnating. If you're a Reconstructionist only, what do you do if you have a UPG that conflicts with historical records? Do you ignore it outright, or do you allow it to expand your understanding? Every living tradition grows and changes with its practitioners and with the cultures they are embedded in. And these UPG experiences aren't always necessarily earth-shattering revelations either. Sometimes it's just like a deity keeps insisting on a specific offering, such as a specific cut flower or incense that doesn't appear in the historical record as relating to them. For example, Ninshuber, in my experience, really likes hibiscus flowers, and Dumuzi seems to like freshly picked tomatoes. Or maybe you'll be meditating at a deity's shrine, and an undiscovered myth related to them will pop into your head. Things like that. For example, I've gotten the impression of Inanna having some type of romantic link to her Sukal Ninshuber. This isn't in any so far discovered tablets, but I've heard at least a few other people make the same claim. Our worship of her and our understanding of her needs to adapt to changing cultures, to the culture we find ourselves actually living in and being a part of. We aren't ancient Sumerians or Babylonians. For better or worse, I'm an American in 2025. To pretend otherwise would end up amounting to LARPing. On the other hand, sometimes when people come from the neo-pagan side of things, the historical context gets lost altogether, and Inanna gets reduced to super limited associations and expressions. When she's looked at through an entirely modern lens, clouded by modern ideas of archetypes, modern identity politics, modern religious and political ideologies, we don't really get the full picture. This is just as limiting as getting stuck entirely in the past. I'm not sure about any of the other gods in the pantheon because I have found that attempting to use the same approach with different deities doesn't always work out too well. But Inanna specifically loves all of the diverse ways in which her devotees approach worshiping her. She likes variety. So I am definitely not saying everyone who worships her has to be doing exactly the same thing. She is very much about forging your own path and doing what you want. With the caveat to that, of course, being that in a myth where she did just that and sought to take over the underworld just because she wanted to, she did get killed, and then Dumuzi ended up having to take her place in the underworld. So do what you want, but remember that the consequences might affect more than just yourself. But anyway, I'm just saying there is value in learning different perspectives, and you'll likely get a lot more out of your practice if you are looking at both the historical context as well as how she fits into the modern world. And I'm finding that incorporating some modern neo-pagan elements, such as the Wheel of the Year and whatnot, into my practice gives me more opportunities to connect with other pagans, even if they aren't worshiping the same gods or even the same pantheon. Because there aren't a whole lot of Mesopotamian polytheists around. I love having my online spaces for connecting with other Mesopotamian pagans and other Inanna devotees, but it's also nice to be able to connect with people who have relatable spiritual practices in person too. And the neo-pagan frameworks provide a kind of basis for connection within the wider pagan community. Plus, it gives a ready-built context for discussing Inanna with other types of pagans who might not be as familiar with her. Which reminds me, the spring equinox and its related celebrations are coming up. Just because those memes about Inanna having some connection to Easter or Ostara aren't true doesn't mean that you can't still honor Inanna during that time. Turn every neo-pagan Sabbath and every federal holiday into a celebration of Inanna. Add in the ancient festivals to her too. We've got to find something to celebrate with the world and the condition that it's in right now so we don't spiral too far into depression. I don't feel bad about blending my spiritual practice with modern traditions because my connection to Inanna and my connection to the culture I'm a part of are both equally important parts of who I am. It does make me a little sad when I see people, I'm guessing mainly newer worshippers, reducing Inanna to just small aspects of who she is. Like when people treat her like she is only a sex goddess and never consider broader implications of fertility of the land or of creativity. Or sometimes people will focus on her transformative powers strictly in the context of gender expression, or they only think of her in the context of the descent myth and aren't familiar with her other myths and hymns. I mean, it's your path. Do what feels right to you. But you'll build a deeper relationship to her if you recognize her as the complex and multifaceted deity that she is. And yes, Inanna is a sex-positive deity, but she is so much more than just a goddess of sexual expression too. And we do a disservice to her and to ourselves, really, when we see her only as she relates to these aspects of humanity. I believe that her sexual aspects originally come from her associations with the fertility of the land, where human fertility was conflated with the fertility of nature, which was a major concern in a time before industrialization, when our survival depended entirely on agriculture. This goes back to understanding historical context. In 2025, I believe that this means that a critical part of her worship is taking an active role in environmental conservation and remediation to help restore the fertility of the land that has been lost through industrialization. and addressing wider environmental concerns like climate change, so our species can continue to live. Just doing sex rituals and dedicating them to her and calling yourself a devotee isn't enough. Don't get me wrong, that absolutely can be a part of your practice. No judgment. I'm just saying she wants more from her devotees than just that one mainly self-serving thing. Use your personal rituals to build energy, but put that energy to good use. In the original context of her worship, the sexual aspects weren't only about pleasure. That's part of it, but not all of it. And yes, she does especially love her trans, bi, gay, non-binary, and queer worshippers. One of her most famous hymns references her powers to change men into women and women into men. And it warms my heart that she is such an inspiration to so many of my trans friends. And I know that we can't really know exactly how people back then saw gender identity or sexual orientation, but we can at least see from this that people with diverse gender and sexual expressions were valued, at least within Inanna's temples. We can also look at this aspect of her in terms of transformation more broadly. She can transform or blend masculine and feminine energies, light and dark, heaven and the underworld, life and death. She is involved with transformation at all scales, from changing human cultures to personal spiritual transformation. That's my segue for talking about the descent myth. This is one of the most well-known myths about Inanna, and the first one most people probably encounter. There are a lot of different ways to read and interpret this myth, including as symbolizing spiritual transformation. For Neopagans who don't specifically worship Inanna, a ritual involving the descent to symbolize a spiritual transformation of some kind might be the only time they ever experience Inanna. And that's okay. But I think such an experience would be deeper and more meaningful if you have a deeper relationship with her and understand some of the historical context of the original myth. Or I'm just too neurodivergent and overthink things. Maybe normal people don't actually want layer upon layer upon layer of meaning in their rituals. I had whole sections about priesthood in modern times and balancing UPGs with established knowledge, but this video is getting too long, so I'm going to save the rest for future videos. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.